Welcome back to Assessing Options for Drought Response. This is number 2, Situation Analysis. This is number 2, as we said, Situation Analysis. It's all about counting and assessing. Now, this is more targeting helping people who are working with beef producers than actual beef producers, because most beef producers will have these numbers under control. But we're going to look at it a little bit this time from the point of view of somebody who's assisting or looking at helping a property respond to drought. So the first thing we've got to work out is what numbers of cattle are currently in each class on the property. What's their status? Wet, dry, steer, heifer. So the breeder herd, whether they're in calf, calf at foot, likely to have a calf fat or store, their age, their condition are very important. And it's also, you've got to think about their value if they're sold now, because we're thinking about responding to drought, so the value of these animals currently is a big part of the choices. What amount of pasture is available and its quality? How long will it last? The choices that you have when you're responding to drought are determined by the answers to these questions. So these are the first questions. Once you have these answers, away we go. Now, as I said before, our example property is based in the North Queensland Gulf. Our scenario, because we need a scenario for our example, is that the wet season has failed and we need to reduce our grazing pressure on the property by 25 to 30%. We don't know what that's going to be yet, but we've got to remove a lot of cattle off the property. Our breeding herd has continuous mating. That means the bulls are left in all year round, but has been segregated on pregnancy status and foetal age. That's pretty important. The first round of weaning normally occurs in May, and most steer and coal heifer sales are in May or June. Now, many herds in Northern Australia will never have control over the bulls for good economic reasons. In these circumstances, having a herd segregation system in place is a very sound target if it's not already in place. Segregating breeders in a continuously mated herd on fetal age of their calf and pregnancy status allows them to be managed. This is critical, and it needs to be done well before the wet season fails. Now, herds that have a controlled mating system in place, which is a lot of herds in central and southern Queensland, will face the same choices, although they are likely to have less breeders calving at risky times of the drought. Now, in terms of the segregation system and continuous mating, it is critical to understand that there are some properties where it's economic not to take the bulls out, not to go to a control mating system. And in those cases, herd segregation is an obvious and very sound choice. It's difficult, it's a step up in management, but it's critical to preparing for drought. So let's have a look at the calving periods and risk in this herd segregation system where the bulls are left in all year round. And of course, in this failed wet season scenario, we're sitting down in about that January-March period saying, right, it hasn't rained, what's our herd structure? So normally, in a continuously mated herd, you have a calving distribution that falls into a regular pattern. Some research work done in the Northern Territory on Kidman Springs Research Station sort of points out the numbers of cows that are going to fall regularly into each category. So we've broken them up into a July, August, September calving that's happened last year, a previous calving period. The cows that calved in this period are probably empty, poor body condition. Remember, the wet season's been poor. They've got a large calf on them. They're a candidate for weaning. Those calves can come off, or they're a candidate for sale, either as a cow and calf unit or a stall cow after weaning. Very unlikely that they'll have a calf in them because of when they calved and the season. Unfortunately, we can't make a big reduction in the grazing pressure because there's only about 10% of them in the breeding herd. And they are a lower risk because we can do something with them. We can pull them in if they're in a segregated group and treat them. Now, previous October, November, December calving period, these are small calves. They're difficult to wean due to their age. Probably they make up about 50% of the breeders in the herd, so there's a big wing of them. Herds with controlled mating will have most of their breeders in this group in Central and North Queensland. They are a lower risk because you've segregated them, the young calves, and you can do something with them. Now, the ones that are currently calving in January, February, March, they are going into the drought with a young calf on them. They need special management. Probably 30% of the breed is going to end up in this group. They are high risk. Their nutritional needs will spike as the drought intensifies. They need special consideration to avoid high mortality rates. Now, the ones that are going to calve in the April, May, June period, right in the middle of the dry season, after wet season's failed, if we've got them segregated, we can consider selling them because they are very high risk. Or we can send them on agistment. There's not a big number of them, but they are at very high risk. There's only about 10% normally fall into that period. May need to be removed if significant mortalities are to be avoided. Now, the thing to remember is if the herd has been segregated, these calving groups are manageable. If they haven't been segregated prior to the drought on fetal age and calving status, you've got problems. Now, let's count some cattle on our North Queensland Gulf example. Normally about 1,500 adult equivalents run around in this herd, probably up to 1,800, 2,000 at times, but normally about 1,500. Normally made about 800 cows, expect 400 or 60 so weaners out of those cows. There's 220 sale steers go each year normally, and we normally have a bit over 220 yearling heifers coming into the breeding herd. Now, if you don't have those numbers to hand, or the people you're working with don't have a good grasp of those numbers, well, we can pretty quickly make those sorts of estimates by using a herd model. Now, the herd model that we're going to look at is called BreedCal Plus, and here's an opened example of it. This is the spreadsheet example of BreedCal Plus. You can get a copy of this off our Future Beef website or off the DAF external homepage. And all it is a large spreadsheet where you start at the beginning and you build a picture of the average performance of that herd. So we start with the birth weights that we expect for this herd. We expect the pre-weaning growth rates. These cattle are all pretty well supplemented with phosphorus, wet season, dry seasons lick, so the calves do pretty well pre-weaning normally. Then post-weaning, we've got monthly growth rates that we can look at post-weaning, and here we get a steer growth path for our steers and a steer growth path for our heifers, so we know roughly what sort of weight they're going to be at various ages. So at 24 months of age, we expect them to average those sorts of weights. At 12 months of age, we expect them to average those sorts of weights. So we build a picture of the average typical performance of this herd, and we can do graphs and things. We can build a picture of the supplement costs. There's a thing here called AE Calc where we identify the weights of each class of cattle, calves, up to 5 months of age, because we calculate their grazing pressure separately from 5 to 12 months old, The ones up to 5 months of age, we have a weighting for them there while they're in the mother. So 5 to 12 months old, we calculate what their weights are from their growth path, average weights for steers and heifers. Then for heifers, for each 12-month period, for the average weight of the cows in the paddock, and for the growth path of the steers. Now those weights come off the growth path. You can see we've split it there because there's a bit of a tail on these steers. And the average weight of the bull in the paddock. Now, in the month that they're sold, we want to calculate the grazing pressure for the period of year that the sale cattle are on the property, and we've got our sale weights there in the paddock. Those go across into our prices sheet where we've got our paddock weight, our loss to the point of sale, body weight loss, the expected sale weight, expected average long-term prices, any commission or percentage of sale, other selling costs, the freight to get them to the point of sale. So all our selling costs come in here. And once we've completed our model, it says, well, these are the number of cattle you're selling in each class of breeders, and these are the steers that you're selling, and their value and gross value and sale costs and things like that. So there's a bit of a summary there. We can do our husbandry costs for each class of animals. If they're sold during the year, they might have different costs per head to the ones that are kept for the full year, so we can think about that. So our females, our steers and our bulls, we can all allocate costs per head, and then it will identify how many are in the class and the total costs for that class of animal, or it'll identify the total cost once you've got the model complete of how much money you spent, say, on wet season, dry season lick. There's about $55,000 there on the wet season, dry season lick. So does my property spend $55,000 on that thing? So you can check your numbers. Breed cow is where we put in the conception rates, calf loss, culling percentage out of each category of cows. This is a herd where we don't have high reproductive performance. We can't get rid of all the empty. So anything that comes in preg-test empty in these mature classes, we can only sell 10% of them because of the reproductive performance of the herd to keep our numbers steady. We do sell 100% of the empties of the 2-year-old heifers after their first mating to try and put a bit of pressure on that performance area. The percentage of sales of the steers at each age group, the cost of bulls, the percentage of bulls, the number of bulls we buy each year, or the percentage of the bull herd we turn over each year. Then it gives us a structure of our herd, of each age group, of how many females are going into the herd, being sold out of the herd, the ones that are mated and retained, and calves weaned from each group. And so we get a lot of data here in this model that we can quickly put together with a series of questions to the property owner that we can just plug their estimates in there and then say, okay, on the basis of what you told me, you typically mate about 800 cows and you typically wean between 400 and 500 weaners. And if they say, yeah, that's about right, and you normally sell a couple of hundred cull females, and you normally sell 180, 37, 220 steers, and they say, oh yeah, it's a pretty good representation of my numbers, that's a start. Now, once you've got that model complete, you can then look at the preg test data of conception losses and number pregnant in each class and PDIC empties and things like that. Now, in our presentation here, we've pulled that table out, and what that allows you to do when you're looking at that table is to say, okay, how many of these cows were likely to conceive last year on average? How many were likely to be pregnant? How many are likely to be empty when we get them in and muster them? How many are likely to have been pregnancy tested in calf and then lost it, so they're PTIC empty? How many remaining pregnant in the mob? How many do we normally sell as empties? And that gives us an idea of also of how many calves are likely to be weaned. So we can use those numbers to complete our situation analysis. So our PTIC empty cows, we counted up, there's about 70 of them. Now, okay, they are cows that we were pregnancy tested in calf and they show up as empty at weaning. So they've lost a calf, lost a weaner. There's about 70 of them in the mob. We think that could be a problem there underlying this. They may be subfertile, although they are currently pregnant. They probably got pregnant again after they lost their calf. Now, these are an easy target for sale, but there's not many of them because you think there could be a problem with them because they lost that calf. Now, of the preg test empty cows that are going to come through this year, normally there's about 271 of them, but we normally retain about over 200 of these to maintain our breeder numbers, because we can't sell all our PDE empties, because if we do, we just haven't got enough replacements coming in. Now, our weaning rate is about 55-57%, which means a lot of these PDE cows are calving every second year. And although most of these cows will be weaner mothers, so we're going to wean off them this year, they're going to be empty on this biannual calving pattern, these cows are at lower risk going into a drought because we're going to wean them. Although they do represent a significant opportunity to reduce cow numbers early in a drought, there could be a problem because they underpin the weaner numbers the year after next. Then we've got our PTIC cows, the ones that are in calf. There's normally over 500 of them. There might be a few less this year because the wet season's been a bit crook. These provide next year's weaners but will require feeding if they stay on the property. So there's our bit of a situation analysis of what's on. So, where to next? Mortality, risk and early weaning.